So it's time. As you could tell by the thumbnail, we're going to be talking about Digimon's attempt at field spells and if this will be the next wave of the future. But before I get into it, let me talk about what this means, because I already know a lot of people are probably thinking that these aren't field spells, and they would be right. However, if you've played Digimon and you've played games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And or even things like Magic the Gathering, lands or field spells are prominent everywhere. And the main thing is, this is what I believe the attempt to make the field spell mechanic work in Digimon. So obviously we have the Deep Savers, we have the Nightmare Soldiers, and we have the Nature Spirits. For those who are wondering, the actual name of the cards are not important, but what these cards are going to offer for every strategy that are associated with them is very important, and I will explain why the mechanic is very similar to field spells right now. So starting off, let's read one. So let's look at specifically first Deep Savers. So for Deep Savers, we have this text. While you have no face-up security cards, you may ignore this card's color requirements. It has a security all turns effect. While you have one or more memory, none of your Deep Savers trait Digimon can be deleted in battle. For its main effect, you get to add your bottom security to the hand, then you place this card face up as the bottom security card. For its security effect, when it's checked, you may play one level 5 or lower Digimon card with the Deep Savers trait from your hand without paying the cost. Now, each of the other aforementioned cards are slightly different, but what I want to focus on is actually how the mechanic is supposed to work. So starting off, what makes this specific card and the other two cards like field spells? Well, first, let's look at how this functions. First, the only thing you need as a requirement to use the card, which is a little bit of what I think is future-proofing, is to have no face-up security cards. All right, easy enough. But what you're supposed to do with this card is once you've activated it, you will take the bottom of your security, or the bottom security card, and you switch it with this card effectively. So this card basically hits the battle area, you use its effect, it replaces itself with the bottom security card and stays face up in your security, applying this effect to the field during all turns, which as you can tell is an all turns effect. However, for their conditional effect, which happens on field spells for people who are wondering, you have to have a certain condition met or something else. Think of it for like Yu-Gi-Oh! You usually have an effect that gives your monsters a specific amount of attack points, or they give them some type of reactive effect or some type of protection which lasts all turns. However, sometimes these effects can have requirements. In the case of the Deep Savers, the Nightmare Soldiers, and the Nature Spirits, they all have a specific condition of some sort. In the case of the Deep Savers, we have the one or more memory as your main way to use the Deep Savers protection effect from being deleted in battle. In the case of Nature Spirits, what you have is you have the ability to get all of your Nature Spirits Digimon in their trait gain Alliance. However, this is only effective, although it says all turns, this is only really effective during your turn, as you can't use the Alliance ability during your opponent's turn unless some type of mechanic is created for that. But like the other aforementioned card, you do the same thing, you add your bottom security card to your hand, you place this as the bottom security card face up, and you do the same thing with Nightmare Soldiers. As for the Nightmare Soldiers, the main condition you're going to have is that all of your level 4 or higher Digimon with the Nature or Nightmare Soldiers trait, they gain Scapegoat. But the main important factor here is that Scapegoat is only really used when your opponent has some type of deletion effect and you use Scapegoat. Also, the Digimon must be level 4 or higher, meaning your rookies and below, well, pretty much just your rookies, can't have access to this ability if they're Nightmare Soldiers traded. Now, the main thing I want to talk about too is the also aforementioned way that you can access these cards. In each of the archetypes, you have searchers that will search for the corresponding NSP, NSO, and in the case of the Deep Savers, DS, which is their corresponding requirement trait for their cards so they can be added to your hand. The reason this is important is just like in Yu-Gi-Oh! You have things like terraforming, and for instance, you have archetypal searchers that will search for their corresponding field spell. These cards are effectively searched in the same way, although in the Digimon way of looking through the top cards of your deck, and can be added to your hand because they have a trait. The main reason I'm considering these to be field spells is that they have technically lingering conditions that are not going to be applied directly from like something in the battle area. It has a brand new area being the security, as we actually see this mechanic well with the specific royal base strategy, which focuses on having its Digimon in the security and allowing them to apply buffs and or debuffs to the opponents systematically by placing themselves into the security face up, and they replace cards from the security that are face down with themselves, allowing you access to get these buff effects, but simultaneously allowing you to effectively kind of sculpt your security. The difference with these cards versus the royal base strategy, although I think the royal base strategy was probably the first attempt to see if this mechanic was strong enough, is that when you do it with the specific options, the difference that you're trading is that there are some penalties for it. Now, the main reason there are penalties is that in the case of a lot of these archetypes, they are multicolored. The reason that I think this was designed is so that when these cards in the future maybe see a lot more play, they don't want them to be too toxic. So in the case of something like Nightmare Soldiers, it having a purple requirement is pretty much solidifying it to purple in case Nightmare Soldiers eventually becomes an all-purple strategy. But then also there could be some type of way to fix it, as you can still use this in the multicolor deck, but this also allows for archetypes to eventually lock themselves in, even if they so happen to be Nightmare Soldiers Digimon, but they happen to be yellow, for instance, purple, or whatever color they so choose. Additionally, for the Deep Savers, they have like blue, purple, and I think they have yellow as well. They will eventually maybe have to refine their archetypes down to specific groups of these different traits that are able to use this specific card a little bit better than, say, something else that might be really strong later on, but because it's a different color, it can't use this card to make that deck even better without having to face that situation while you have no face-up security cards, meaning if for whatever reason you have a deck or they implement more cards like this, you can't actually use this unless you have a purple source additionally. So this keeps the cards a bit more fresh, I would say, allowing them to be a bit more usable, obviously, but then keeping them more restricted to specific colors and typings, whereas vice versa, you don't replace them. However, these effects that are applied on these cards are nothing that I would say are super groundbreaking. However, they are definitely massive buffs to their strategies. Now, the main thing I want to talk about by finishing off the video is what this mechanic actually does for the entire game as a whole. Personally, as you could tell, this is kind of my thought process of them being field spells, but I also think this is Bandai's way of making sure cards like this are able to be balanced well enough, but simultaneously able to see it long play as long as their effects are not too dangerous. This might also be for the fact that when we finally receive World Unification, in the case of World Convergence in that set, we may see more cards like this, as I do think for the remaining products outside of the new structure decks, we're not really going to see anything like this, I think, until then. So these cards are in a test run period until the next card waves come out, and if there are cards like this might actually allow the decks to be a little bit more interesting, as I do think that with all the staples we've been receiving in the case of the scrambles, the memory boosts, the trainings, everything, we needed some way to make options a little bit more unique, because pretty much they were all just becoming generic cards. I think this is the first way to allow different strategies to have an option that's specific to them, but simultaneously it allows the archetype to take advantage of it instead of having to, in the case of like the memory boosts or the trainings, have to reliably get them. This card effectively puts itself into the security, so simultaneously it does allow for a new type of, I would say, a mechanic, as you do have to effectively remove your security to use the cards and then place them into your security. So some decks actually, and this might actually just be me looking into the future or from the past, is that the TK from BT4 or BT14, that card actually received a limitation as of a while ago. And one of the reasons I might have believed that it got a limitation sooner than later, because some people said it didn't really need to happen, but it was good, was the fact that cards like this are going to start appearing more often. And I believe there's an unintended synergy that would happen with a card like that and a card like this, as many cards that have, if their security is added to, may have an unfair advantage with cards like this. So this might also be a way for Bandai to make specific cards for different decks and strategies that are very weak in terms of actual meta capacity, but will have more chances to be viable with cards like this that give them these massive buffs. As of right now, these cards are actually rather interesting in terms of their applications. I do think that they're not overly broken in any capacity. I think that they're very strong but not broken. Main reason why is I think the best one as of right now would probably be the Nature Spirits card, and this is just because Nature Spirits has so many Digimon currently that it's able to use this tool very well. However, one of the biggest problems I think Nature Spirits now has is that you have to choose between their green and or blue eggs now, as I do think that Nightmare Soldiers is definitely looking a lot more green thanks to this next wave of support, and obviously the Kabuterimon support. I'm a fan of Kabuterimon as a whole, but the point is, the decks are starting to become more solidified, and I think the Nature Spirits, Nightmare Soldiers, and Deep Savers will have access to these cards, and they will be able to use them well. I just want to finish off by also saying that when I look at these cards again, one thing that I find interesting is that while it says, while you have no face-up security cards, and you can ignore the color requirements. One thing that I'm definitely believing that's probably going to happen is if we get more cards like this, they're obviously going to be of different colors, so this might be a way of type restricting them to their colors. I know that was kind of mentioned with what I was saying, but I want to make that clear because there's some people who obviously want to hear me say everything, so I wanted to make sure that I say that. By the way, this first line of text is very important because right now we don't really have many mechanics like that. I think the only deck that really does have face-up security right now is Royal Base. So once this comes out, this will be definitely a lot bigger. I know a lot of people have probably been passing aside these cards, not because of the fact that they're not good, it's just more so the decks are a part of right now aren't that strong. But like I said, it sets a whole precedence, and I do think that this is impactful. So I hope you guys learned something today. I didn't want to talk about this because it was really bugging me, and it was on my mind in a good way, right? Because I really do think that if Bandai's trying to go their way of giving us field spells as another mechanic or some type of way to give us more variety to the game, like status conditions that aren't too broken, I really do like this because I am not overly happy with floodgates in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not overly happy with so many floodgate rookies in Digimon. However, there is a lot of balance with the floodgate rookies. Most of them are not a part of an archetype, or if they are a part of some archetype, there's a main reason that they're a part of an archetype. It's to give them a little bit more variety, actually in the case of something like Nature Spirits. But the point that I want to get across with this is that there are many decks that will take advantage of cards like this in the future, but for right now we only have 3 and only time will tell. As literally we will have access to these cards in January, so by the new year we will be already seeing the impact of these cards in the metagame. So like I said, I hope you learned something. I'm very glad to have made the video, and I hope you guys are taking care of yourselves during the holiday season. But as always, this has been Brad from the Ad Army signing off, and for all of you out there, to sign on.